Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. So glad you could be here and spend time with us. We're really excited about tonight's show. First of all, I do, though, want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. Please find him on Google. Google him and learn about his native storytelling and how he and his wife have helped to preserve history in an unusual way that is older than time itself. It's an amazing story, and it's worth listening to. Tonight, Mark has some amazing people here, so I want you to sit back, take your shoes off, put your feet up, and enjoy all the strange, weird, and wonderful things this group of people is going to talk about. And then, at the end of the evening, I'm sure you're going to be not only enlightened, a little confused, but definitely entertained. So, Mark, if I can find you here. Mark, welcome to the show. It's all yours.
Thanks. How are you faring?
Doing well, thank you.
Okay. We've had this show booked for about 2 months, and what we were planning on discussing has been postponed, like so many other things. But we've made some adjustments, and we're still going to have a great time anyways. And we're helping to flatten the virus curve, but we're shooting for a IQ spike with our 2 guests. So we're defying the mandated 6-foot social distancing, and we're having more than 10 people congregate, but we can do that on radio. And we're doing that just for our friends in Arlington, Texas. Anyhow, the hostess for Just Another Tinfoil Hat, Zelia Edgar, is returning, as well as the walking encyclopedia of all things weird, Steve Switchblade Ward, is returning as well. Him as the host of the High Strangeness Factor and the correspondent for Mac Maloney's Military X-Files. And, Barbara rescheduled last night's show with Brent Rains to Friday from 9 to 11 Eastern time, 9 to 11 at night Eastern time. It kind of sounds like the Monterey Pop Festival, where the Who and Jimi Hendrix argued with the producers about, I don't open, I close the show, and I'm not going on before them. So, figures, Brent is somehow involved in this rescheduling thing. So we'll see who puts on a better act. But hi Zelia and Steve. Thanks for returning to Nightlight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Now, did you say IQ spike in your intro there, Mark?
Yeah, that's
okay. Well, Zelia, that's on you. I was tested. You know, you're not dealing with a chimp here or anything like that, but I think the load's on Zelia. So.
Oh boy.
Okay, no pressure, Zelia. but you know, when we've had you on separately, but not as a panel of experts, but you know, when we did the other shows, you know, we did cover a lot of the flying humanoids. I thought maybe tonight we could start off by some of the other possibly human characters that have been overlooked players in ufology. There is the example of Tiny from the Mothman Prophecies, you know, John Keel's book. Okay, Zeus, since this might be one of your areas of expertise to raise our IQs, can you tell us a little bit about Tiny, and is he an isolated case, or is he's a character that is found fairly common in the UFO literature?
I would say that the case of Tiny, which I have to say I absolutely love this particular case, is kind of like a pinnacle Men in Black encounter. And simply because of how absolutely bizarre it is. And so, well, the story goes that in January of 1967, a family by the name of Christensen returned to their absolutely new home in Wildwood, New Jersey. They had just moved there, and there was no phone number listed or anything. And they were returning from a trip to Florida. And so they get home, and they're actually, like, getting ready for dinner when someone knocks on the door. And here it's this man. He's about 6 feet, 6 inches tall. Really just a broad, tall guy wearing a fur Russian-style hat with a black visor and a really long black coat that seemed to be made of some really weird, thin material. He also had these, like, really thick-soled, rubber-looking shoes. And so from that description, you know, something that I'm really intrigued by in the paranormal is actually the clothing that a lot of these different entities wear. And the Men in Black are no exception. They always have these just kind of bizarre outfits. And it actually gets weirder. He proceeds to tell the family that the man of the household, Edward Christensen, the husband, may be due to receive some money. And this guy is a missing air investigator, and he, you know, would like to speak to them for approximately 40 minutes. He was very particular on that point. And so over the course of the conversation, and this is really classic Men in Black stuff, it was all about what scars Edward Christensen had, birthmarks, what schools he had attended, what vehicles he had driven in. Throughout the course of this conversation, the man's pant leg kind of rode up his leg, and the daughter, Connie, who was 17 at the time, noticed that he had a green wire which ran from his sock up into his pant leg. And again, it's just one of those little details that just is so weird and so out there, you know, and I really love about this phenomenon. Mm-hmm. So,
that one is creepy.
Yeah. And she would just. Oh, go on. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, Mary Heyer had someone coming into her office as well that was the guy just really seemed very awkward dealing with people.
Yeah, so many of these encounters, you know, in a lot of them, because the Christensen family had a UFO sighting that previous November at a different house, which is really interesting to note. A lot of these Men in Black kind of lines of questioning, they appear to be very nonsensical, and usually they do circle in even more sometimes than the UFO or cryptid encounter, because the Men in Black do show up sometimes after cryptids too. They do kind of circle in on the witnesses instead, and they're very particular on personal history and family history and things like that. Even like medical data is something that they seem to be very particular about. But other than that, sometimes their conversations are, like you're mentioning, very awkward, very nonsensical. They contradict themselves. I know there's so many cases like that, even just in the Mothman prophecies, where one of these guys shows up and says, I think one example is that one showed up at the house of a witness and said that he didn't know John Keel, and then like 20 minutes later in the conversation says that they're great friends. So there is this kind of just runaround, really just bizarre sort of line of reasoning that they use when they talk to witnesses.
Yeah, and Keel spoke about Tiny was able to calm the dog down with, a stranger being in the house.
Mm-hmm.
But the people were put off by his, we call it adroitness. It's just very interesting how these Men in Black characters are just kind of focus on the dog. Not, they can't really deal with people. That pattern just seems to keep reappearing from other stories, but the wire is something very unique.
Yeah, the wire is just a very strange little point there. And the interesting thing, too, I saw somewhere actually a letter that Keel wrote about this incident to Ivan Sanderson. And it included even more details that apparently, I believe it was this incident. It may have been another one, too, but I think it was the one with Tiny. He actually recited a long, strange poem at some point during the exchange. And, again, just details like that, there is just so much. It's not even, your normal run-of-the-mill weirdness. It's like advanced weirdness involved in these sightings. And
that's correct. It was the same one.
Okay, yeah. I thought it was the interesting thing with this one, too, is that, so many times promises were made to the witnesses, especially with the Men in Black, that there would be some sort of, follow-up call because, these guys used all sorts of different ploys, to get into the house and to talk to these people. And, some of them were of course, you have the phantom meter readers, you have the phantom photographers, all these almost business schemes with a promise to get back with the product or the information at some point. Usually that never really followed through. In the case of Tiny, however, and his claim to be a missing air investigator, apparently, I think it was the next week, their family did receive a call that, they weren't due to receive any money. So that's an interesting facet of this case as well.
Steve, when you're up there in the upper Midwest, just kind of getting started on the flying humanoids. We've covered Mothman, the Van Meter visitor. People have been talking about this Michigan Mothman. What is the situation going on with this new cryptid?
Are you talking about the kind of spillover from Chicago, that region? I guess
yes.
I'm not really. Yeah. Okay. May I say a couple things about Tiny before we get to that?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Zelia's right. It's very intriguing about this. It almost like the wire was coming. I think there was kind of a spot on his skin. It almost looked like the wire was coming out of him. So I want to know, was he wired to 220 or 40? Maybe you shouldn't shake his hand. You might get one of those buzzer things. But very interesting, that the Russian-style hat. If you go back to some of the old airship reports, some really crazy ones in England, I think around, 1917 maybe, they would have these like airships with the undercarriage. They would see, and this is before Zeppelins really took over, they would see these strange-looking men that looked like they were wearing Russian hats. I don't remember if they had visors or not, but they were talking in, they seemed like guttural German or something. Just stuff that didn't make any sense. The technology shouldn't have been there. They didn't know, who it was from. The garment he was wearing, tiny, was very kind of thin, and not really very cold outside. I think one of Mary Hyer's visitors had the same thing, where he wasn't really dressed for outdoors. Indrid Cold, the infamous sort of a man in black type that supposedly conversed with Woodrow Derenberger, had the same thing. So you get these crazy patterns. We have to be careful because we know there are hoaxes interspaced with a lot of this stuff. And, so we never know. We have to suspend our judgment on a lot of things. But the reason, Keel thought it was by pure happenstance that he found out that the family was having all these experiences. And it was because he had this, his catchphrase was, ask the experiencer what they had for breakfast, which simply meant find out about the individual. Don't just find out about their UFO sighting. And I found the same thing in my limited investigation with people that have had abduction experiences. That's not the only thing that's happened. They experience shadow people, strange phone calls, strange visitors, and so forth. So if you ask the questions. Anyway, I'm very skeptical about I guess they're mostly calling it the Chicago Mothman, although the sightings are all over the place. Someone that is also connected with the Van Meter Visitor Festival, Alison Jornlin, she and another lady, Kim Poppy, have done some great research. They actually went to the different sighting locations all over Chicago about a year or two ago, and they compared notes with the description of the areas and so forth. A lot of the sightings didn't match up. If you're going to make up a story, you don't get the description of the area quite right. They found a lot of that there. Also, I understand from some credible people that some of the original reports that came in about the Chicago Mothman came into MUFON, and there were like small groupings of them coming from the same IP address. So now Allison did think there may be some credibility to some of the sightings. Some of the people were credible. And I think most of it I'm very, very dubious about. And I wonder if we're not dealing with something, if some are in fact real and some are not. I just wonder, I'm going to throw this out there, that perhaps we're dealing with another Slender Man scenario where somebody starts out with a fabrication and then becomes real to some degree. And when I say real, I don't mean necessarily physically real, but something more in the way of an apparition. So I am not, the lady that you really want to talk to on that would be Alison Jornlin. Now, Zelia may have done more research than I have, but I'm just very, very hesitant to jump on many of the Chicago Mothman sightings.
Steve, it almost sounds like you're saying that the Chicago Mothman is almost like like ancient Greek term agores, where like a group of people think it and it, what kind of like manifests itself.
The only reason is that when Allison went through and she found most of the sightings she thought were dubious for one reason or another, she did say she came across a couple where the individuals seemed credible and it like they may have really experienced something. If it wasn't for her finding that, I would just write the whole thing off. And this is just pure speculation. I have no idea. I just think that I would not personally spend much time on the Chicago Mothman thing. And we can thank Allison and Kim Poppy, who again they really they told a great story a couple of years ago at the Mothman Festival about they went through tunnels to get to one place from another, and there's these big spiders hanging down. So they risked life and limb, and they're and their precious bodily fluids to get through spiders and spider webs and everything to find out the truth about the Chicago Mothman.
Okay, so
now there are other people. I think what's his name? Tobias. I'm going to lose his name here. There are other people
Tobias
that disagree.
Whalen?
Yes. And so there are other people who've done a lot more research and will disagree with me. This is just one man's opinion, and I'm relying mostly on some other people's research in my ideas.
Okay. So, and do you think Tiny was a human or part android? That just kind of adds a new facet to these characters that are showing up in the literature.
It is so strange. He even had Zelia. Didn't he have some kind of a badge on that looked like it had Greek letters on it that he hid when he came in?
Yeah.
And it's almost like it was staged. It's like we're going to show this badge. Oh, we're going to hide it. I do wonder. There was something I read somewhere where somebody thought that it was something that was kind of staged or a prank or something. I don't know. We have to be very. It's so difficult to sift through this stuff. I think that while there have been some real, even Dr. Hynek, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, talked to people where they were approached by individuals, sometimes very human. Like individuals dressed in black or seemingly to be government officials, telling them to be quiet about their UFO sighting. So there's some really odd ones that there was that one Dr. Hopkins in Maine and Jenny Randall's in England uncovered some very, very strange Men in Black situations. But I wouldn't be surprised if the government has staged things in the past. Even recently, Nick Redfern published some things about suggesting that perhaps the CIA staged some of the UFO encounters in South America years ago. I would not be surprised if they even staged some Men in Black encounters. And I wonder why would they do this? Why would they stage UFO events? Why would they stage Men in Black events? It seems like they create all kinds of programs sometimes to see if they can manipulate people, test the limits of their belief, and then sometimes they just forget about the program. It doesn't exist anymore. I would not be surprised if some of, and I say stress some, of the UFO encounters of the past and even present were staged events by our government, maybe even other governments, I don't know. And they may have done hundreds of them, and most of them never even surfaced, but every once in a while we get a UFO report or an encounter by someone that talks about an experience they had decades ago, but it may have actually been manipulated. I suspect that some may be mixed in with what I would call the real experiences, and how the heck if I'm right, how the heck we can sift through those, I don't know. Determine what's true and what's not.
How do you and Zelia get right to some bureau in Washington to get reports on things like this? And I know some authors have, and they actually get files. Parts of them are redacted, but have you done information, gathered information through means like
freedom
that?
of information?
Yes.
I have not. Nick Redfern has done a phenomenal job. A lot of his books are filled with that kind of information, but no, I have not. And there's no excuse for it, because another great researcher, John Tinney, has done a lot of that. He's had some really, really huge breakthroughs. He's also he's been writing. He hasn't got it published yet. He's writing a children's book to talk about the Joe Simonton case, the cosmic pancakes from outer space. And at the very end of it,
awesome.
he's showing children how to access freedom of information and what kind of language to use, because if you use the improper language, you won't get what you want. But so I must admit I have not done that. Yeah, that's going to be a killer book when it comes out. A children's book I can't wait to read.
What are some of his suggestions of using words? We have people in the audience who hopefully are researching and writing. It is important to use good, strong words. Get your point across. What is there a sample of how to approach someone? Without
I don't recall exactly. I know that he's talked about it in his lectures, and I really can't give you a good answer. It's just that if you're not precise in what you want, they can just ignore it. And one thing, and I can't, I won't belabor the story because I can't, I don't remember the details. But the Kinross incident, where the plane or the jet collided with the UFO or came together on radar, and the pilot disappeared over Michigan.
That was in Michigan, right?
Right. Yes. Well, John Tinney, he did something so sneaky. He was trying to get information on that event, but it was all locked up and redacted. But he did some kind of. You'll have to get him on and listen to his wording. He did something very clever, and he got all the information on Kinross. And the upshot of it was the guy's widow had never gotten any kind of a pension or anything or payoff because they said that he wasn't actually listed as dead, her husband, the pilot. And so he changed all that. He got her the money. And also where he's buried, the little cemetery where he's buried, he got a plaque put up that this particular man, and I don't remember the details, that this man encountered something like aliens from protected the Earth from aliens from outer space. And that's on his tombstone. So plus this lady got the back pay. It's a phenomenal story, and I'm not doing it any justice.
Okay, cool. I think when Ron Rademacher was our guest, he spoke a little bit about that. We're going to have to develop that topic. It keeps coming up. It seems like there's a lot more to that story than what we've discussed on Nightlight. But I'm intrigued by this now.
I think if you go to John Tinney's website, John Tenney, weirdlectures.com, I'm sure it's written up in there somewhere. You don't have to listen to my very poor rendition of what happened.
Interesting.
I'm trying to check it right now, see if I can.
Okay. So, Zelia, while Steve is perusing
yes, okay.
the website,
all you do is look for the Kinross documents, John Tinney, and you can get the details.
Cool. Okay.
He's got PDFs and all kinds. Yeah, he's really good. He's a master at like Nick Redfern of gathering freedom of information files.
Okay. Well, it's right there in the Constitution that we have that right to do it.
Yes.
Okay. Since we're talking about the farmland, vast expanses of farmland in Michigan, Wisconsin. Have you seen much about crop circles recently, or have they not happened in the last couple of years? Probably not now. They probably aren't forming, but have you encountered this phenomenon any time over the last few years?
I haven't this way. What about you, Zelia? Anything of note happen around Wisconsin?
No, unfortunately, I've never heard of a crop circle that's happened like within the last couple of years near me, at least. I know that Wisconsin does have a history of them every now and again, but nothing I've been able to actually see firsthand.
It doesn't seem like there's been we may have just been missing the reports. I remember there was one that was right near the Ohio Serpent Mound across the street from it, but that's got to be a good decade or more ago. But it doesn't seem like I've not heard much recently.
I think it's more recently than that. And
it
may
could
have
be.
happened.
I'm thinking 2004, but I don't know. That could be wrong.
It seems like there have been a few crop circles reported in that vicinity recently, and we did a show maybe about last May on some of the British crop circles. I just thought it was really a very intriguing subject about their formations. Do you have an idea of how they're formed? When? Why?
If you go back, as I mentioned, I think off air, I used to kind of sneer at this. I remember we had crop circles coming up around the turn of the century, roughly, 1999, 2000, and they were happening in England quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And you had the infamous Doug and Dave come out and say they'd made a bunch of them. So of course everything was explained by Doug and Dave. It's actually incredibly complicated. But I did read a book by Dr. Simeon Hine on it was called Opening Minds, and he talked about how there are people. I even knew a lady that went to England, and people would get together under cover of darkness with their boards and so forth. It was all planned out, and they would make these incredible formations overnight, and people would think that they hadn't, they were the aliens. However, let me give you a really good example here. About 1999, the London Daily Mail hired a group of circle makers because they wanted to prove that, it was just all man-made. So under cover of darkness, they made it was the Avebury cubes. And they looked like three-dimensional cubes, if you were to draw one out. And they did it overnight, and there were even crop circle researchers in the general vicinity. Nobody heard or saw anything. So, the London Daily Mail thought, well, we got this. We've demonstrated that they're fake. But one of the guys admitted to them that they had seen a strange light moving around when they were making it. And they even said when they had done some before, because they were kind of expert circle makers, they had seen some of the phenomena. And then I won't belabor this, but it goes the other way, too. People have there was a 77 in Uruguay, a farmer saw this sort of a Saturn-like craft come down, shot some beams of light or whatever, formed a crop circle. The animals reacted to it. The dog ran up to it and then stopped and then died later, got sick or whatever. Something really physical was going on. You have situations where people have seen lights or apparently craft or something forming some of the formations in Holland, in Uruguay, and so forth. You have other situations where circle makers, sometimes they even stopped because they were making their planned crop circle formation, and then they started seeing balls of light moving around. Some have even been captured on film. There was one, Milk Hill, I think it was, in England. In the daytime, they caught this kind of a light or orb moving around. Some people said, well, it's a barn owl, a reflecting light. But then it turned out that when Simeon Hine checked, it actually passed over a tractor. The tractor stopped, like the cars do with UFOs. And when it moved away, it started again. And then you can go to back in, there was a case in 35 and 27. One of them, this guy saw the circle form. They called them devil circles. He told his buddy what happened. He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. That happens all the time." And there was no whirlwind or anything like that. There was another case where a guy, they would call him witch rings. He saw it. I saw one. His compass went haywire in it. He put his knife blade in the soil. It magnetized it. His dog wouldn't go into it, even though he called it. This is back in the 30s, 20s and 30s. Sounds very similar to Whitley Strieber talking about stepping into a modern-day crop circle. People feel drained and so forth. So I don't know what the heck is going on, but it's like both sides. You see, it almost like the people forming the crop circles are either perhaps generating the phenomena or perhaps attracting it to it. But there's other forces that seem to be making it. And, some people say, well, it's radar, satellite technology, the government's doing it, it's aliens, it's people, and it's just one of these things that just it's very hard to sort out.
And when we did the crop circle show last year, Lucy Pringle was talking about natural forces creating them as well. And it's like when energy coming out of the earth to make the patterns. It really is a captivating subject.
Just one last thing. There was a lady that was moved during, in London, World War II, during the Blitz. Some children were moved out in the country. Well, she went to an area where they would find these circles all over the place. And they were just, they sensed that they should keep away from them and not go into them. And in the same area, in the forest, they would see these strange lights, these orbs moving back and forth around behind the trees. So it's quite a mystery. And I don't know, it's just not that easy to sort out. For a while, I thought, well, look, most of these are simply man-made, and many of them are. Even the very complex ones are just they're really miraculous. And but it remains a mystery.
And Zelia, Steve was just mentioning these. Some of the crop circles are associated with orbs, and Keel mentions some of the orbs he saw over the Ohio River. He and Mary were sitting in Gallipolis ferry on a hilltop, and he was kind of using his headlights to communicate messages to the orbs. You're doing a lot of investigation on orbs. What are you finding about the orbs responding to other forms of light?
Oh, yeah, that's something that comes up a lot, and Keel noticed it, too, that they actually will, directly respond to light. I know that in some of his earlier experiences during that time, if he's shown a light, the other lights in the sky, a lot of them were these, luminous purple blobs would kind of scoot away. But probably one of the most notable was when he actually used Morse code and spelled out the word descend, and the light actually did move down. And that is really intriguing to me, because I think, and it's kind of interesting too, even with the crop circle thing, because I know for a long time too, pretty much exactly like Steve, I must have watched some TV show or something when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, where someone showed you how easy it was to make crop circles, and then for years I was like, oh yeah, they're all man-made. But a lot of them are associated with, specifically orb or light ball phenomena, and of course there's a longer tradition of them possibly being made by demons or witches or fairies, things like that. And so that's an interesting thing too, when you do have these people even making the crop circles and all of a sudden they're seeing these luminous objects. I do think that there's got to be some understanding or interface between these orbs, these balls of light, and human consciousness. Because, I mean, that's even the interesting thing that occurred to me when I read that from Keel, that he spelled out the word descend, is, this communication does happen between us and these, things, for lack of a better word, these paranormal occurrences and entities. And when it comes to UFOs, if these are indeed extraterrestrials, I think there's just this kind of accepted, they're, to a point where they can understand our language through the use of some sort of translator or something like that. I think that it might be deeper than that. I think it does show a genuine connection between us and whatever they are. Something that goes, deeper than language, just maybe straight to intent,
That's a good point, because when he used Morse code to write out descend, we wouldn't normally expect aliens or light balls to know Morse code yet. So you must be right. They must have been responding to his consciousness somehow.
Yeah, I feel like there is, either a link or almost like maybe something more direct than that, that these things might actually be connected to us in very intrinsic ways.
And, that scene is like on page, the page 152, 153 of Mothman Prophecies. There is a mound in that vicinity, and it's still standing. There were noted many more in the area. It's near, the confluence with the Kanawha River and the Ohio River. So you have a lot of water concentrated in one place. It's very typical to find a lot of mounds in an area like that. Keel, speculated that the UFOs had the mounds may have been built on some kind of ley line that they understood at that time, 2,000, 2,500 years ago. The UFOs were, there we are back to some type of consciousness involved in this phenomenon. And on one of your shows recently, you were talking about the effigy mounds in Wisconsin, that there is the same type of paranormal events going on there in your area. Can you tell us a little bit about the effigy mounds?
Oh yeah, I am majorly interested in the effigy mounds. And Wisconsin has, I think possibly the highest concentration of them in the U.S. And we do have a variety of different mounds. You have the more conical-shaped ones that don't really represent anything, some burial mounds, but really the effigy mounds are those mounds which are shaped like different animals or figures. And I've always been really interested in them. My mom actually worked as an archaeologist, so I kind of have that interest sort of born into me, I suppose. And the interesting thing with that is not only is there's a strong connection, which Keel does mention across his articles and in the Mothman Prophecies, I think it was, between UFO sightings and mounds. But there is also a connection. This was really made by Linda Godfrey between cryptid sightings and effigy mounds. She cited a huge connection between sightings of the man-wolf or dog-man and effigy mounds, and there was even a correlation between specifically the mounds associated with the water panther entities. And there was even a really notable encounter from 1936 when a night watchman for the St. Coletta Institute in, where was it? Oh, man. It's in Wisconsin. I can't remember exactly what the town was. He actually saw.
You're talking about where she found that. It was south. I think it was southeastern Wisconsin, and I even have the book here that she saw, but I don't remember the name of it. But go ahead. Yeah, no,
he saw, for lack of a better word, a man-wolf slashing the earth of an effigy mound nearby, and it actually even uttered a word that sounded like Gadara at this guy. And so, that connection is really strong between sightings of the man-wolf and these effigy mounds, in close proximity. And then, of course, too, you have Devil's Lake, which actually has 3 mounds right near it, a bear mound, a lynx mound, and then a bird mound. And there's a ton of ghost accounts, supposed lake monster. There's a history of lake monster reports there. So you see this connection, again, not just between mounds and UFOs, but across the board, paranormal occurrences.
The book, just to interrupt for a second, is the Indian Mounds of Wisconsin, and I can't see the name, but you'll find it. And one of the other mounds she mentioned, Zelia, were water spirit mounds, which are the panther mounds are kind of, they're very simplistic, like you'd think they'd look. You've got a little head and little ears and I guess a small tail and the feet. The water spirit mounds are characterized by a very long kind of a pointed tail. And for some reason, she said that primarily the clusters of dogman sightings were with those types of, like you say, water spirit mounds. Bizarre.
Yes, there again is, another tentative connection to water, even through just, that figure, not directly to a water source, perhaps, but to something that represents it.
And may I remind you, Zelia, I think you found in an old Fortean Times when it was digest size, wasn't there an article on black cats in England and their association with yes? Can you talk?
With
I can't
waterways.
remember the details. Yes, but
I think it was. It was by.
I don't remember. It was.
I actually was just.
It's one of the old, Mark, it's just one of the old Fortean Times way back before it became a real slick magazine.
Yeah, it was the connection between, I believe it was actually, I think it was the black shuck sightings in water. So many of them occur right on waterways or near waterways. Yeah, and that's just, again, too, you just have this, it seems like paranormal occurrences, even UFO sightings and ghost sightings, show up near water so many times. And, when it starts branching into cryptids that would have no apparent connection, you think of these, the black shuck, the black dog sightings, you wouldn't necessarily connect that to something that is aquatic. Yet there it is showing up again and again.
And Steve, have you gone down to the Two and Wee Park when you're not at the TNT site and seen that water panther carved in the stone that's on display?
Oh, I guess I've been there, but I haven't seen that. No, I'll have to look for it next time.
No.
That's right in the General Point Pleasant area you're talking about, right?
Right. It's down there by Chief Cornstalk's grave. But there's that, the rock art is called, this is a sample of the water panther. I think it was found in the Kanawha River, just a little, downstream from the confluence. But like Zelia said, this carving is associated with water. It's just a very interesting image that keeps reappearing in these river valleys, archaeological artifacts, folklore, what Keel was writing about. There's some seems like there really is some kind of pattern there that we're just discovering.
I think you're right, and I will say that's one area I'm not good at. There have been other researchers that have looked at the geology of the area, the makeup of the rock, the flowing water, perhaps creating some kind of a field or whatever. Even Lethbridge, the famous dowser, believed that some apparitions were caused by the proximity of water. And then you get the real weirdness. You've got, of course, UFOs plunging in and out of the water, lakes and oceans. And you have apparent strange-looking craft, alien craft, sucking water up in hoses or without hoses. And even the UFO pilots gathering water in buckets. So, it just you start going down the path, and you're looking for answers, and you just get so many more questions.
Do you find that the America's river valleys have USOs, or are they more associated with the larger lakes? You're closer to the Great Lakes. Barbara's closer to the ocean. What are USOs more associated with larger bodies of water than river valleys?
I would say so, Zelia, but there seem to be exceptions. Some of the lakes in Puerto Rico that talk about apparently crafts coming in and out of. There was I guess there was some sightings. There was that one Zelia in the Mothman Prophecies, where somebody, I think on the Gallipolis side, saw what appeared to be a landed craft on the water in the Ohio River. But I'll let That's all I know. Maybe Zelia can think of other examples of smaller bodies of water where these have come. You've read Sanderson's book more recently than I have.
Yeah.
Didn't he deal mostly with the oceans?
It was mainly, Invisible Residence was the one that really dealt with the USOs. And I would say that there is more of a connection to the larger bodies of water, but there is definitely still a connection to, even smaller ponds and reservoirs and rivers. And that's kind of what makes it so intriguing is, if you look, because Sanderson in Invisible Residence really kind of propounded this idea that perhaps, there could be, and of course he was always very particular about never really stating this is what I think it is, but it was always, just an option of what could be, which is something I really respect about his work. He had this theory that, possibly there could be an advanced civilization which had evolved and continued to live in the water as opposed to on land, and that this might be responsible for sightings of USOs and even most UFOs. And so the interesting thing is that, there is, I would say, a higher concentration the larger the body of water is, but he also pointed out a lot of different sightings where things were observed going into smaller lakes and ponds and rivers, to the point that, you have to wonder if there was, in his concept, of this possible civilization, if there was travel between these areas or these were like outposts or something like that. I tend to think that the water connection, I do wonder if it does have something to do with the energy. And again, too, with the paranormal, there's so many topics that border it, that to really figure out, okay, is this the energy of this area affecting, this phenomena, you would have to really study, the geology and, the composition of the area and stuff like that. I think that there probably is something to the fact that water does affect energy. But I think, too, that a lot of the time, especially with these UFO landings, it might be symbolic because, again, too, you have so many cases where UFOs are seen over hydro plants or hydroelectric plants and water reservoirs, gathering water, asking for water. So I think that in that regard, the connection to smaller bodies of water might be largely symbolic, if I was going to venture a guess, I suppose.
Yeah, and you just mentioned that there was the case in a river in Jamaica a couple weeks ago when we were covering sea monsters. Dave Godsword was talking about some of these pretty much unseen giant squids or an octopus or something like that off Jamaica that nearly sank medium-sized fishing boats, but it had the characteristics of octopus behavior. But anyhow,
was that contemporary, Mark? Was that something recent?
Yeah, I think I don't know. Say within the last 40 years or so. I don't have the book in front of me right now.
Right.
I can get back with you. But the point I was going with this is, there have been this one partially unseen sea monster in Jamaica, and the USO in Jamaica River. It's really amazing how Keel incorporated so many world events and sightings, different phenomenon from around the world into his Mothman prophecies.
Yes, and also another book that's a favorite of Zelia's and mine is Strange Creatures from Time and Space, which has been retitled, I think, The Guide to Mysterious Beings. And that was the book where he first proposed the idea of window areas, trying to come to grips with why these things sort of pop in and pop out. And when you talk about lake monsters, everybody, Wisconsin is filled with lakes with monsters in it, as I recall. Peppy. Isn't Peppy a Wisconsin beast?
Yeah,
I think that's one of the ones that Chad Lewis
and then, of
wrote
course,
about.
Jenny in Lake Geneva, yeah.
And I think, where's Bessie? Is that Lake Erie? God, I don't remember. But what the heck? How is it? People, it's like, even in Loch Ness and in Ireland and so forth, there's Loch Morar, where Morag is supposed to dwell, and that's on the east side, or the west side of Scotland, away from Loch Ness. Some of these lakes are too small to support a large beast, much less a colony of them. So, there's not enough fish there. So why is it do we keep seeing these creatures? Dr. Donald Ormond called it the phantom menagerie. Why do we keep seeing these creatures in places where they can't exist, yet we have dozens, hundreds of people that have seen basically the same thing in the same area for a number of years?
Mm-hmm.
And so
I know
many
that
of these
Julia
sightings
has the answer. Go ahead.
Oh, of course. Let me just, check my pocket. So many sightings, too, of these lake monsters. It's almost like with many of these things, it's kind of like a flap where you get, dozens of sightings at one time and then you'll go a time and absolutely nothing happens. And, especially when you have a restricted area like a relatively small lake. And I use the term relatively small because, it's a lake. It's a fairly large area, but still, when you're looking at pretty much a controlled ecosystem and you're trying to rationalize how, a whole species of these really large creatures could live there, the idea of it only showing up for a month or so and then kind of sinking back down, it seems very strange if you look at it solely from a physical standpoint. And I have to think that, because that was one of the first things that really started bothering me when I was looking at cryptozoology from, the classic conventional standpoint of these are all just undiscovered creatures. Is so often when you had to think about, okay, maybe there's just one of them. Yeah, you might be able to reconcile one creature living in a lake like that and, not being seen all the time, flaring up sometimes and being able to survive. But really you can never look at, if we're looking at animals, we have to look at a population. And so many of these places just really don't have the ability to sustain a population for so long. And so I tend to think more often than not that with a lot of cryptids, they are possibly some sort of, projection or materialization, something not exclusively of this plane of existence, this world, and something that is largely temporary, which flares up under certain circumstances.
And something that might go along with that is if you look at the Loch Ness sightings, in recent years there have been a great deal of UFO sightings, strange lights in the sky. There's even been Men in Black phenomena reported there. And if you go back hundreds of years, they called it something else. It was the water horse, the kelpie, this evil shape-shifting creature that would lure men and women to their doom into the water. So, F.W. Holliday, who was a great British researcher, was investigating Loch Ness, found all kinds of high strangeness, went to Ireland and found other very similar, a lot of these creatures are, or whatever they are, you got kind of the hump or the back or whatever, you got the long neck or whatever, sometimes you don't see that. And they're just, you get the sort of the paradox of people seeing roughly the same thing and some even spectacular sightings. Nessie was supposed to have seen slithering across the road a couple times near Foyers. But it's another, you see the pattern here. We keep getting to these different paradoxes where, we're dealing with, are we dealing with flesh and blood creatures in some respect, if not all of them, or are we dealing with, as Zelia was talking about, some aspect of consciousness, something more like an apparition maybe?
Yeah, and Steve, you just mentioned, patterns, and you were just talking about, the kelpies luring people to their death, drag them into the Irish lake. It's pretty similar to, the mermaid lore. So you get, some variations of the, water horse versus the half lady, half fish.
And the siren. The siren would lure, sailors to their doom. They'd lure their ships onto the rocks and so forth.
Yeah, like Lorelei. And Zelia did a video recently. It's kind of like this, what we're talking about with like Bigfoot and Momo. You want Zelia, would you like to get into Momo? That is a new subject for probably most of the Nightlight listeners.
Oh, sure thing. Yeah, Momo is just, it's another one of those really classic, cryptid cases that, and again, when I started really researching the paranormal, I was obsessed with cryptozoology, and I was definitely coming from the concept that it was, these are just simply undiscovered creatures, and if we look hard enough, we're going to find them. And so Momo I had looked at for years simply as some sort of weird subset of Bigfoot, with a few slight variations. And that has to do with the fact that, Momo is a little bit smaller than, the typical Sasquatch sightings. It was about 6 to 7 feet tall, covered in this long, dark brown hair that actually covered up the face. People couldn't really make out a face ever on these sightings. And the name, too, Momo, is something which I just absolutely love. It's actually the abbreviation for Missouri, and then the first 2 letters of monster. So Missouri Monster, it's perfect. And, there was, I call it a flap, really, which started in July of 1972. And this was actually a year, though, after one of the first really dramatic sightings of the creature. But this flap really flared up in July of 1972 when Momo was spotted by two boys who were playing in their backyard. And it was first spotted at the base of Marzolf Hill, or Star Hill, as it's called locally. And, you know, the interesting thing, though, is that you do, through the next couple of months, you have tons of sightings of the creature, but not just the creature. You know, with so many of these really classic cryptid monster accounts, you get a lot of high strangeness. And so that is definitely, Momo is no exception in that regard. You have a flare-up in sightings of UFOs. People were saying that they're seeing craft and different fireballs. There were anomalous screams in the area, even disembodied voices. And the really interesting thing is that the area where this was occurring is Louisiana, Missouri. And there's a history of, you know, here and there people would hear phantom screaming. There's a history of spook lights in the area. And there's even a slight history of sightings of a creature. But for some reason, for that span of a couple of months, each of these different types of paranormal phenomena just decided to really flare up, and sightings reached an all-time high. And, you know, there was other high strangeness involved, too. The main family that was involved with many of the sightings of Momo was the Harrison family. Those were the two boys that saw the initial sighting in July of 1972. And right after that sighting, actually their dog became seriously ill for some hours afterwards. And you see this across the paranormal all the time. Even with the Flatwoods Monster case, the dog that accompanied, you know, the posse up to the sighting of the downed craft and the Flatwoods Monster actually died from the same sort of affliction which plagued the human witnesses. Thankfully, though, in the Momo case, the dog was all right. But there's a lot of really, really high strangeness involved, which definitely complicates it if you're trying to look at it from a strictly cryptozoological perspective.
Okay, and since Momo is maybe a more southern type monster, is he associated with Mississippi River or some other kind of body of water?
There were a lot of sightings, actually, either directly in or right near rivers in the area. Yeah, that's another great point. Because, yeah, again, you're seeing the same pattern just over and over again with that. Okay,
I was just wondering. I thought you said he was also sighted in Louisiana. I kind of get that, Delta marshy type environment.
Oh, yeah, the name
parts of the state.
Sorry, the name of the town was Louisiana. Louisiana, Missouri.
Right, in Missouri, right?
So, yep, in Missouri.
I can add to that. Let's get back to Zelia in a second. There was an interview I found on the Faded Discs archive by Hayden C. Hughes, a voice from the past. And they were investigating a series of sightings in Louisiana, of all places, Missouri. I visited there about this time last year just to kind of look around. And they had seen a bunch of Mothman-like creatures, not Mothman, Bigfoot-like creatures. The guy lost his job because he moved his family out of his house. He went back to see if the thing would come back, and they didn't like him chasing monsters, so to speak. So this guy, a city employee, lost his job. But they had also, people had been seeing strange lights in the hill. And a year and two later, in Pennsylvania, Stan Gordon reported those Bigfoot and UFO sightings going on for a couple of years in southwest Pennsylvania. So again, the patterns keep showing up. And then some friends of ours, Chad Lewis, Kevin Nelson, and Noah Voss, wrote the Big Muddy Monster, which covers this incredible flap that Zelia was just talking about in didn't it congregate mostly in south central Illinois? Is that about right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and speaking, go ahead and keep talking about the case you were just talking about, Chad's monster.
Oh, the Big Muddy Monster.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
That's a new one for us as well.
But that was okay. Was that part of what you covered on your YouTube video, Zelia?
I didn't cover it in the Momo one, even though it is connected because it was, again, like the early 70s in Murfreesboro, I believe it was.
Right, and so you're talking general proximity.
Yeah, and again, that was the one that there were some sightings of a lighter colored one there, right?
Yeah.
Or was that? There were a lot of, see, and this is the interesting thing, again, because you have the early to mid-70s, a lot of these monster cases flaring up that were very similar to one another. Where you have these, these Bigfoot-like creatures, but they're different in certain ways, or they're very specific, and then you also have a flare-up of high strangeness. So, yeah, the 70s is it's one of my favorite times for paranormal investigation because there was just so much going on.
And John Keel, in, I think, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, talks about some of the southern monsters, Louisiana and so forth. They were the ABSS, the Abominable Swamp Slobs.
Yep.
I'll have to look for that one on Amazon if they resume delivery. That sounds like an interesting book. I'd like to get that hopefully soon.
Yeah, it's one of Keel's classics, yeah.
Okay, and speaking of all these patterns, how's your book? Was it something in patterns?
Parallels and Patterns, a new paradigm for the study of paranormal phenomena. Joey is further ahead than I am. Joey Medea, my co-author. I've been working on the folklore, the various traditions of folklore and modern day UFO experiences connection, and there's just a lot of things to pull together. So it's going along pretty well. But I have no excuse now that I've been restricted to the house for a while, and the missus is off in Texas, so I'm unsupervised. That's not a good thing ever when I'm unsupervised, but I'm trying to get a little bit of discipline together.
Okay. Well, whenever it's done, you and Joey are welcome to make a return and
guaranteed this decade, Mark.
Yes. Okay. Well, hopefully we're all here still by then, and we can all get together and listen to this book. And I really like the first time I heard the title months ago when Mac brought it up. It was like, that's real. Including parallels and patterns in the title, really does say a lot about paranormal studies, archaeology. It becomes a customary behavior. And you can learn something from that by just seeing the repetition. Or
it's
generations continue doing it. There's a reason for it, and you extract some kind of information from the pattern.
Well, Zelia and I have been on the same kind of path, and we've been influenced by John Keel and others. Jacques Vallée and so forth. May I tell you briefly when I met Zelia the first time? We were at the Van Meter Visitor Festival, which is about a sort of a very strange winged creature. While it looked kind of like a prehistoric bird, pterodactyl or something, had very odd properties. It's supposed to have lasted around a week in Iowa, Van Meter, Iowa, in 1903. And the guys I just mentioned, Chad Lewis, Kevin Nelson, and Noah Voss, wrote the book The Van Meter Visitor, and they have helped create this great festival at the end of September every year. Well, Zelia and I spoke there last year, and I didn't know anything about Zelia except that she was associated with Wisconsin MUFON as a director and investigator. And so Zelia is listening to me. I've told this story before. So she started talking, and I'm sitting next to a friend of mine, Brandy, who we both know, and both Brandy and Zelia have been co-hosts on my show. And I said, Brandy, it sounds like this lady has read John Keel. And right after that, she starts talking about John Keel and the super spectrum, which is kind of a something he proposed as trying to come to grasp with the strange forces that brings all this together. And then she started talking about the books we just mentioned, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, and also Keel's Trojan Horse, which was the turning point for me. So I was just I just thought it was very, very cool. So I'm a bit biased because for better or worse, she thinks a lot the way I do. Fortunately, not completely, but so it was really, really a lot of fun. And some of the old timers on some of the other podcasts have lamented that there's not any young people coming up. The old guard's going to die away, and what's going to happen to ufology? Well, fortunately, we have Zelia Edgar, who is one of the clearest thinkers, at least in my estimation, in this whole realm. So it was just it was a lot of fun. She was there with her. She's got this great support group with her family, and so it was just a lot of fun.
That was an awesome time.
It really was. And we're Twin Peaks freaks too. I mean, good Lord,
exactly.
It's just scary from there.
Thank you so much too. It's so nice to hear you say that. But I also have to say too, it's kind of uncanny because I guess we even used the same example at one point, the Marlington, West Virginia creature. Yeah.
Our talks were completely different.
Yep.
But yes, and it was a very obscure Bigfoot example too, as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just uncanny.
You took different paths to arrive at the same conclusion.
Yes, but it's funny because as you know, I've been on Mac's show, and there's Commander Cobra is one of the guys on there, and he has his own show, Task Force Griffin, on KGRA, I guess. And he asked me one time when I was on, he said, "Can you even look at anything in the paranormal without doing the sort of John Keel analysis, looking for," and I can't. I mean, it's automatic now, and I think it's pretty automatic for Zelia. When you look at these things, you just automatically start, like the Russian hat with Tiny and the Russian hats in 1917 in England. Maybe there's no connection, but it's fascinating the patterns that do show up and that may actually represent something important.
Oh, yeah, and I'm to the point, too, where if I don't see high strangeness with something, I actually feel weird. Like if there's a cryptid account that doesn't have, some sort of other bizarre thing happening around it, I'm like, okay, what's up here? Something's missing. I think, once you kind of, I don't want to say devote yourself to the Keelian idea, but once you've really thought about it and turned it over. I know for a while that, like when I read Mothman Prophecies was technically not my first Keel book, but the first one I rediscovered when I was 17. It took me a while to really start coming to terms with it because it really does cause you to just, the entire paradigm for the paranormal is just totally flipped. And then it really, at least for me, so much stuff just started making so much more sense than trying to go at it from the very separate UFOs are extraterrestrial, cryptids are undiscovered creatures, ghosts are spirits. I'm not even saying that it discounts the idea that some of the phenomena might still be that. Some of it might still fall into these conventional ways of thinking, but I think a lot of it is way more tied than conventionally we've thought it to be.
But Mark, I think that most of us, even Keel, started out looking at the UFO phenomenon. First he thought it was nothing, and then he thought, well, it's got to be extraterrestrial. Jacques Vallée did the same. There's this pattern where so many researchers started out. I was very happy in the 60s with reading, the Lorenzens book, Jim and Cora Lorenzens, APRO, one of the early UFO organizations. They wrote some great books on flying saucer occupants and so forth. And I was convinced that we're, craft are landing from other planets, and the little humanoids jumped out. And this is before the Greys kind of came in and took over. because grays weren't always with us. Used to be very hard to find a gray. But then, and I've said this before to Zelia, I think, that when Trojan Horse first came out, a friend of mine and I, who had been in a couple of different UFO groups over the years, we resisted it. We didn't like Keel's message that these things seem to be connected. So we thought, what's Keel doing? What's he thinking? Why even bother studying this stuff if it's just all connected? And then, if you pursue something with an open mind, and I read his book, and I begrudgingly started to see that it was connected. And then, I don't know, Zelia, did you ever read Passport to Magonia by Valet?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I love that.
Yes, well, that was the second whammy. I'm was in recovery from Trojan Horse. Then I read Passport to Magonia, which Mark, for the audience, makes comparisons between folkloric traditions and some modern-day UFO experiences. And then that was it. There was no turning back.
The thing that really hit me with Passport to Magonia, too, because, I read that fairly recently, so, I was still very much acclimated to the idea that this stuff is a lot stranger than, first glance allows. But what really hit me reading Passport to Magonia, too, is the kind of, in a weird way, there's a finality to it, because you look at this, and I feel like a lot of ET people, they're okay with, connecting fairy lore to the extraterrestrial idea. But the thing that really hit me with that is realizing that give it another 100 years or so, and when, the new conventional way of thinking has shifted, are people going to be laughing at us calling the UFO occupants extraterrestrial, just as we kind of look at the fairy lore, if you're looking at it from an extraterrestrial lens and think, oh, that's so silly when it's so obviously interplanetary. And so seeing that pattern, especially in Passport to Magonia, just really drives that idea home that, there is something to this phenomenon. What it is, that's really, what's behind it is the thing that I'm very interested in now.
Yeah, Mark. In some cases, it's indistinguishable when you talk about certain cases of folklore and modern day UFO experiences. There's sometimes just the outer trappings are a little different, but everything else is the same.
Yeah, and if people, we have just under 40 minutes left. We should just take a minute and let both of you, plug your shows and Zelia's YouTube channel, and we're going to get your archives if they like this information. I mean, you two are really two of the top scholars in the paranormal field and cryptozoology. Just if our listeners are enjoying what they hear, how can they learn more about what you do and hear more of your diverse topics?
Did you want to go ahead, Zelia?
Sure thing. So if you actually just go to my website, justanothertinfoilhat.com, and there's no spaces in that, I've got links to all of my YouTube videos, my podcast on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, anything that I'm possibly guesting on, upcoming speaking engagements, articles. That's all located there. And then my YouTube channel is also called Just Another Tinfoil Hat, no spaces. And then my podcast on the Paranormal UK Radio Network is also, if you can believe this, called Just Another Tinfoil Hat, with the grand exception that that one has spaces between the words. So, but yeah, if you just go to my website, everything kind of, you'll get redirected wherever you want to go.
And you're available on Facebook?
Yes, and that's just my name, Zelia Edgar. So, yeah, feel free to reach out.
And
okay.
I'm on Facebook. I do, for the past, it's been 4 years now, I've been doing Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, which is kind of a crazy and fun show, as a correspondent. I started out, Mac spotted me. Actually, Mac is a writer, and he writes the great fun Wingman series, which is kind of post-Holocaust Mac, rather a Hawk Hunter flying an F-16 battling the forces of evil, neo-Nazis, neo-commies, and everything. Very entertaining. So I friended him on Facebook, and he must have seen my Mothman post, so he had me come on one time to talk about the Mothman, and then shortly thereafter he just had me on every week. So it's been a blast, and Zelia and I are both on the Paranormal UK radio network, and you can click on Podbean at that tab, and you can find our shows and many others. Mine is the High Strangeness Factor. I've been doing it for a little over a year now, and I think the variety of guests have been pretty good, including a young lady named Zelia Edgar, for example. We've done. She's one of my. I've got the greatest rotating co-hosts. Andy Mercer is my producer and helped me create, and Zelia and another young lady we know from Van Meter, Brandy, and both these ladies are really smart and fascinated by the paranormal. And I used to just enjoy doing the shows alone, actually. I mean, Andy always adds something, but then I found it's really a lot of fun having a co-host. So especially people that are as interested in this stuff as I am. So, and the book, Parallels and Patterns, A New Paradigm for the Study of Paranormal Phenomena, will be out someday. And I guess that's about it. I don't have a cool website like Zelia does yet.
Okay. Well,
no YouTube videos. They can just look at my still picture on Facebook, I guess.
And both of your shows are terrific, right? Very, very informative.
Thank you.
And when you
thank you.
You just appear as just guests on other people's shows, you do a great job, and I think you really bring a lot of credibility to the cryptid studies, and you are very knowledgeable about what other people have seen, and it is interesting where if you go back into the artwork or even some of the documentation within the Bible. What were some of these people seeing? This has been around for a long time.
Probably as long as human beings have. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is, especially with UFOs, you see where people think that it is this like new thing. And, even if it goes back only a couple hundred years. But this is something that, even with it being the paranormal, I think that you kind of have to come to terms with the fact that this kind of is a normal condition for our society. As human beings, this has always been with us, in my opinion, these strange occurrences. And as to whether, a lot of people think at certain points in history there was a greater understanding of it, I think that might be likely in some cases. But, yeah, whatever this, the blanket phenomenon is that kind of manifests in all these different ways, I think it really has been around with us since we've been around.
And I don't know if you're familiar with Albert Rosales and his incredible database. He's put it out in a series of 15 books called The Others Amongst Us, Humanoids. And he divides it up into different years going all the way back to 1 AD. And, of course, the more recent volumes only cover a few years. But it's just fascinating. I mean, we've always had people with us. And earlier about what you were talking about, one of the most fun things for me is that Zelia and I have had the pleasure of I've had the pleasure of being with her on several different shows as the joint interview, and that's just a blast. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and both of you are out in the field, which brings a lot more credibility to your research. It's not like just looking up stuff on Wikipedia. You are at the conferences, meeting witnesses and talking with people. And Steve, you were in the Appalachia area last year, and you met with Stan Gordon to review the Kecksburg.
Oh, it was at the Kecksburg sighting, the thing that streaked across the sky back in '66. You know, my wife saw that. We were I was in junior high at the time. She would have been 7th grade. I was in 8th grade. We didn't know each other for years later, but she saw it, and I heard about it the next day. And it was funny because in 8th grade we had a creative writing assignment to talk about what happened, and of course my head was filled with Marvel Comics science fiction plots, so I'm pretty sure I was guilty of unconscious plagiarism when I wrote about the alien that came out of it and took human form and tried to take over the world. Not a literary masterpiece, but I was able. Stan asked me to speak there, and so it's just a historic event. And but you know what? There was a guy there, Ray Keller, Cosmic Ray, that Zelia and I got to interview about a couple months ago. And he's a contactee guy. He firmly believes in the contactees and even claims some of his own experiences. A great guy. I met him at Kecksburg. He believes that the Kecksburg craft may have been a Russian launch meant to go to Venus, but it failed and fell back to Earth because some of the strange lettering around the bottom of it people talked about may look like a little bit like the Russian alphabet. I forget what that's called off the top of my head. But anyway,
Cyrillic?
Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say Cyrillic. Yeah. I think Zelia's right about that.
Very convincing that maybe it's supposed to have diverted a little bit before it crashed or landed. But and that would make if they hauled this thing away, that would make sense that it was actually some kind of they captured a Russian craft. So. I don't know what it was. I honestly don't. But I love Ray Keller's theory. And he was fun, wasn't he, Zelia? We did a 2-parter.
Oh yeah, I got to co-host for that one, and that was a really just fun conversation.
Yes,
he's written a trilogy of books about Venus, and they're fascinating. But again, you have to. The contactee aspect is very interesting because you get this duality of things that seem like they're hoaxes, but then you get some stuff that seems like it just might have some substance to it. So it's one of those. It's almost like so many of these things fall under the trickster category. That's something Zelia and I haven't mentioned yet, but so many of the things we've talked about could easily fit under that category.
Yeah, one of the biggest ones I feel like is, it seems like the intent with a lot of this stuff gets all jumbled up, and this was something going way back to the Men in Black type stuff. And yeah, even with that too, you have to be careful because there is a lot of evidence that there was, government, kind of a government plan there that sent out people trying to get information about people who had seen UFOs. But, even regardless of that, so many of these cases, the ostensible motive of the Men in Black is to tell people who had seen a UFO, don't talk about it. And the amazing thing is that in a lot of these cases, the likelihood is that if the person hadn't been told don't talk about your experience, they probably would have dropped it. A lot of these people were just, normal average people who saw something unexplained and really, that can affect your life, but a lot of people just, practically they just kind of want to keep going with whatever they were doing before. All of a sudden you have this strange character showing up and saying, don't talk about it. That just adds more importance to it. And I think Keel pointed that out, that in a lot of these cases, this ostensible motive of silencing the witness, it does the exact opposite thing. And it's the intent of this stuff, that trickster aspect that comes through so often. That's just really interesting.
And I think Jacques Vallée is the one that said the phenomenon negates itself. In the same way, people see a UFO, sometimes they don't even report it, and somebody shows up and says, don't talk about it. So it's sort of, you've got that kind of negation thing brought in, even though people are, more, it's almost like they're being manipulated. They're more likely to talk about it. And then you also have experiences, Mark, oftentimes, so many, now, you talk about in the field. I haven't done a lot of stuff in the field. I think actually Zelia probably has more with her association with MUFON. I'm mostly a researcher, not exclusively. But a lot of times people will say, they don't tell all the aspects of their experience. They say things like, we weren't going to tell you that part because it was so weird. We didn't think you'd believe any of our story. So sometimes the experience is so bizarre that in a way it kind of negates it, because you think, well, how, that's just too far out, too weird. One other quick Men in Black story. Jenny Randalls, in her book called The Truth Behind the Men in Black, there was an incident where a young lady in England sees a strange light in the sky. I don't recall if she reported it or not, but a couple men came to the door, looked flesh and blood men, from the government, and the parents didn't even know why they let them in without any kind of question. And so they started questioning this young lady, and she was very distressed. And then they left. Jenny Randalls got the idea. She was a great researcher. Jenny Randalls got the idea to put this young lady under hypnosis, even though there shouldn't have been anything weird. From her perspective, this lady was being verbally questioned by the one man. The other man was shooting her questions telepathically, intermittently. And she couldn't understand what was going on. She was so distressed by this. Neither line of questioning was particularly revealing or very important. So what the hell is that all about? And one last thing is, John Keel suggested that perhaps some of the Men in Black experiences might be illusory. Not that they were hallucinations, but that they may not actually be real physical experiences. They may be something different, something, I don't know, from the super spectrum, where, of course, he borrowed the term from Sanderson, ultra-terrestrial, which he talked about. That gets into another subject, transmogrifications of energy and so forth. But he wasn't, while people were having real experiences, he wasn't sure always how physical they were. It might have been something else. We're going all over the place here. Maybe we're losing. We're not grounded or something.
No, but Keel did talk about when he did interviews with people that he did keep in touch with them for a while afterwards. It wasn't just a one-time deal.
Yes.
He did notice that some people were psychologically deteriorating after some of their paranormal experiences. And since you're talking, just talking about regression, since Mothman Prophecies came out in the early 70s, has regression therapy helped people to not have, for some people not to go through the psychological deterioration that was a little bit more prevalent in the 60s and 70s, early 70s?
I think, and Zelia needs to weigh on this too, I think that the general consensus is that a lot of researchers are very suspicious of regressive hypnosis and recognize that the interviewer must be very careful not to lead the witness. I just interviewed Alan Godfrey, a classic UFO abductee from 1980 in Todmorden, England. Last year I interviewed Missy LaMontagne from New Hampshire, a more contemporary experience. They both told me that they had breakthroughs, but they take what they heard on tape about what they said with a grain of salt because they don't remember it. Now, Zelia, when Keel talked about deterioration, it seemed like he was talking about the people that had these continuing contact experiences, more like the contactees of the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And they were like giving, they would give them prophecies and or things to find, and like they were given some kind of a mission or something like that. And if they kind of bought into that, that seemed to not go well with them sometimes. I think Keel called it false illumination. Is that your impression, Zelia? Okay.
Yeah,
so
and I know the regression. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No. Keep going.
Yeah. No, the regression hypnosis thing. It is. It's kind of a mixed bag because I know it's used a lot with the abduction experience, which is, like you're mentioning, it is very different from the contact experience, I think, in how the people move forward from there. Because a lot of the times the contact is occurring consciously, and they do make conscious life decisions. How much of that is influenced by what really happened, I don't know. Whereas an abductee, a lot of the times it doesn't surface until much later. And I know in Messengers of Deception, Jacques Vallée did cite a study where he found that in people who had no real interest in UFOs and exhibited no hallmarks of being abducted or ever even having a casual encounter, using regression hypnosis, the abduction experience and memories can actually be very easily planted in someone's mind. So yeah, regression hypnosis is, I think that there is the potential for really great breakthroughs with it, and I think that also there's a potential for, some, kind of painting of experiences. But, and yeah, this,
keep going.
Oh, yeah. No, the deterioration mentioned, too, that's a lot of the, the contactees. I know one of the classics is when he does talk about the doomsday prophecies, and all of a sudden you have a whole group of people in a bunker on a hill waiting for the world to end, and it just doesn't.
Yes, but prior to that, they were given prophecies that came true. So they're kind of led along, and where they're getting, and then they get the big one. They form on the hill and tell the newspapers, and then nothing happens. There's a pattern there. I try and make this quick. Years ago, on an old Phil Donahue show, he had a parapsychologist on. I couldn't find the name of this guy, but he talked about automatic writing. And he said, well, he believed that there was some actual contact from the other side. He said that if you practice automatic writing, you have to be careful because it's actually, most of it's coming from your own subconscious. And he said, at first it will be friendly and then intimate, and then it can even be very damaging and obscene. And he said, if you understand what's going on and it's really coming from you, you could use it for some kind of self-therapy. Not that I don't think I'd want to do that. And then, do you guys know the classic case of Alexandria David Keel talks about it. She wrote Magic and Mystery in Tibet. She allegedly created a thought form of Tulpa, a jolly little llama, not the sage, not the animal. And it was she could only see it. Supposedly she created it as a thought form, the way the Tibetans supposedly did. And it was this happy little jolly llama that only she could see. It was, but it started to become sort of negative. It looked like it was losing weight. The face was getting leaner. It would start to play little pranks, and then it got very nasty, almost like poltergeist phenomena. So when you got that pattern, friendly, intimate, and then nasty, I thought that sounds like some of the experiences of some of the people that Keel talked to, the contactee syndrome, as you would call it, similar to what they were having. So do you think that suggests that perhaps some of this is connected to human consciousness somehow, if it follows that kind of pattern? And if I'm right, now this doesn't fit everywhere, but it does seem like it shows up in some aspects. And it would fit some of the contacts that Keel had mentioned in the Mothman Prophecies, like Jay Perro and some of the other people that were unnamed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Steve, when Merle was our guest, Merle Fankhauser was our guest about 13 months ago. He spoke about his Signals from Malibu CD was basically done through automatic writing, and he told our listeners about the time when he got to speak with John Lennon, and they spoke a lot about automatic writing and John had these fresh ideas that seemed like they were almost downloaded, and he just wanted to go into the Abbey Road studios and do them, turn them into music, while they were still fresh. And of course, Abbey Road was booked up, and it was just kind of disappointing for him. In that part of the creative process, but that was how John wrote a lot of his songs, was through that automatic writing. And we would learn later on that he did have that sighting of a UFO in New York, and Merle had the one sighting too in the Haleakala crater. So it started off being productive. It doesn't sound like it became, followed the trend from the couple examples that you gave. So I don't
think
know.
That's a good point, because this pattern doesn't exist everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start, we talk about automatic writing, we're talking about channeling as well. I don't think all channeling is created equal. I think that if you look at the volume called A Course in Miracles, is very similar, very kind of uplifting. It's similar to what they call the New Thought movement around the turn of the last century, which actually influenced a lot of the positive. Zelia and I have talked about this. A lot of the positive thinking books and gurus like Wayne Dyer and Norman Vincent Peale and so forth. So it's not all the same. It's just that there is a negative side or a trickster side, and people need to be aware. I don't think I would ever do any channeling or automatic writing. I just wouldn't. I know a lady that has done it, and there's a lot of interesting things that have come out of it. But I don't know if you've looked into it much, Zelia. Automatic writing or channeling.
Yeah, I mean, it comes up a lot in Keel, of course. That's, where I know most of it from.
If I can can I enter in here?
Yes.
Sure.
Sure.
Because I do channeling. Because I do channeling.
And do you think? And do you think that? I mean, obviously, there's some channeling is done at a high level. I think you could say by their fruits ye shall know them. Can I ask you what you think about Oaspi? John Ballon-Nuberl and Giant Fung. Okay, go ahead.
Let me just add this. I tell everybody who is thinking of trying to do automatic writing, or channeling, the only way you know that for sure you're channeling is that you're getting philosophy. If you get anything that is like direction, like you should do this or you should do that, no matter how pretty it is, Spirit will never give you direction. It will give you philosophy that you can utilize to make changes in your life if you choose.
And that sounds like A Course in Miracles.
Could be. I haven't read it, but it could be. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 50 years now. My whole website is channeled, and a great deal of what I write is channeled. So go ahead.
Have you ever run into a gentleman named Ashtar?
No, I haven't.
Okay, just out of curiosity. Seems like everybody's channeled that guy. He's got a lot of face.
Very popular.
He has a face. Okay.
Well, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, when you are channeling, you are literally channeling your own higher consciousness, the spirit you carry within. Somebody once asked me what master I channeled, and I said that the only master I really was in contact with was Master Charge.
Well, I think you're onto something. Well, of course, you would know better than me. You've been doing it for years. But there was remember Tom Snyder, The Tomorrow Show, eons ago?
Yeah.
Right.
He had Dr. Patrick Flanagan on one night. Flanagan was the first guy to write a book on pyramid power. He was a child prodigy. He was a genius. He talked about spending the night in the pyramid one time, one of the first people back in the late 60s, early 70s. And he started spontaneously channeling. Well, he did it for Tom Snyder. And he started the breathing and the closed eyes and the deeper voice, and he said, "Hello, Tom," and then he said, "My name is whatever it was, Dr. something or other," and then he said, "I am a higher level of Patrick's consciousness." So it was associated with him, and not, even though he gave a different name, it wasn't associated with another entity per se.
Well, the thing is, if you give yourself a title like that, people will pay attention. Most people, who say they channel, St. Michael or Archangel Michael, they're really channeling their own higher consciousness, which is the spirit that they carry within, that aspect of you that travels lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. So lots of times people who do this work feel people won't pay attention to what they're saying if it doesn't come from a higher entity. And it does. It comes from them, but it comes from their higher consciousness. So their mind will basically holographically give them what they need. So in my opinion, every channeler is channeling from their own higher consciousness, whatever they want to call it.
Have you ever had a situation where you felt like you started channeling something that was kind of negative and you were able to get back on track, or have you never had that experience?
Never had that experience. I will say that when I channeled, when I do channel, I get poetry, and I can't write poetry to save my life.
Oh, there you go.
So, but it's always beautiful poetry. I've never had, knock on wood, I have never had a bad experience when channeling.
That's excellent. I'm glad that you pointed out the connection where it's really you're dealing with your own higher consciousness. I think that's very valuable.
And not only that, but when you stop to think about it, the spirit that rides in this body, it's the comparison I have used so often is that the human body is like an automobile. And we travel in it for a lifetime, and then we get another model when we go into another lifetime in another dimension on another planet, wherever. But what's so sad is the human consciousness, not higher consciousness, consciousness, is treating the body as though it was a BMW. The reality is it's a Maserati with all the bells and whistles. They just haven't discovered them yet. So that we have the ability to teleport, to astral travel, to be telepathic, to be channelers. We have that capacity. We just don't know it, and we aren't reaching for it and using it.
And have you done what we might call remote viewing in this state?
Oh, sure. On the website, there's a whole series of remote viewing meditations that I did with people. I took them all out of body. We went to lots of different places, and then we came back. It's all on barbaradulong.com, remote viewing.
Excellent.
Wow. It was a lot of fun. But I'll let Mark have his show back. I'm sorry, you hit something I had to say something about.
I kind of took over a bunch of questions. Sorry about that, Mark. I owe you $20, I think.
We'll just add that to my double pay that I've been receiving from Blog Talk.
Okay. Well, I'll just take it out of my my salary. We'll be good.
But I don't know. We have about 5 minutes left. Maybe both of you could just give us your quick views of any new directions in ufology, and plug websites and shows again, and kind of wrap up the night. And we had a great time, and tonight hope we just got people's minds off of the plague situation, and made people more aware. So is there Zelia, have you noticed any new directions ufology is taking?
I'm tentatively hopeful. I guess I'll say that, you're not even just ufology, but every branch of the paranormal is kind of starting to move towards looking at the similarities between each of these different fields. I really think that, the more you look at the evidence, the harder it is to ignore the fact that there are definitely patterns between these perceived different types of phenomena. And so I think that the more we can, as researchers and investigators, really study that connection, the closer we'll get really to trying to understand what's behind these manifestations of these, some apparently different types of phenomena, and really start to understand what the phenomenon is itself. So that's, like I said, tentatively hopeful that we're moving towards that.
Okay. And how about you, Steve?
Yeah, I think she put it very well. I was came through a time when I discovered John Keel, man, and I was sort of worshiping at the Church of John Keel, and I went to the 1976 MUFON Symposium in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dr. Hynek was there, and I was, it's like I'm the guy that got the religion, and I'm knocking on the door with the pamphlets and telling people that it's paranormal, that's connected, and they're looking at me like and I'm an insurance salesman, and it's 11:30, and they want to go to bed, So yes, I do see. I mean, there's still a lot of division here and there, but more and more people have. And John Keel, thanks to your efforts having us on the show, Zelia and I, and Brent Raines, who's coming on your show, has been kind of rediscovered. He was forgotten for a while, and he was being there's some negative things saying about him, but he's enjoying a resurgence. Even David Paulides, I heard him from his own lips say, John Keel was ahead of his times. And that was the missing 411 guy, David Paulides. Nick Redford said something similar in one of his recent books. So anyway, thank you for having us both on. This is just an absolute blast, and you guys are great.
Oh, yeah, this was so fun. Thank you again.
Yeah, and how do people listen to your shows and archives, YouTube channels?
We're on Facebook, of course. We're both on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Click on Podbean. And I'm just, what am I? This high strangeness factor. I'm not just another tinfoil hat. That's Celia. and she wisely named her YouTube channel the same. So, if I named my two things, if I had two things and named them differently, I'd forget one of them. And Matt Maloney's Military X-Files.
Yeah,
and watch for Zelia occasionally on my show.
Oh, yeah. That's always a fun time when I get to co-host. Is just a highlight of being on the High Strangeness Factor. It's just such a fun time every time. You always have such amazing guests, too. So.
Well, that's good. Well, so do you. I mean, you're one of the few shows I can listen to because I'm not on it. I don't listen to myself.
Both of you are in high demand. So says something about your scholarship. And
thank you.
Do you have any upcoming appearances, or is that just everything's on the back burner because of the virus situation?
Yeah, just Zelia and I were going to go to make a pilgrimage to Butler, Butler Paranormal in Pennsylvania, but that's been moved. We'll both be in Van Meter in the end of September.
Yes,
that's probably awesome. For certain.
Okay, so when
I have a couple of other events, but I don't know if they're going to go on or not.
Okay, it's at least with Van Meter in September, there's a good chance that the craziness will be over by then. Hopefully, that will give people a chance to actually get together with the family and get together out there and meet with you too. Okay. Barbara said we're down to about a minute. Barbara, do you want to put me on mute and you can wrap up the show? And I just want to thank you so much, Zelia and Steve, for being our fantastic guests tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you again.
Hey, everybody.
A great time.
going to have to, Mark's not supposed to say, put me on mute and then keep talking, but we will talk about that later. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. Hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Hope you learned as much as I did. And we'll be looking for you tomorrow night with Mary Joyce, and then Friday we have another show. So check out the calendar and check out the YouTube channel. If you like what you listen to, please subscribe. We love collecting those numbers. Good night now.